Are you finished, yeah?
Yeah.
This Wednesday's jackpot is over €2.5 million.
Now on RTE Two, it's over to the newsroom where we join Eileen Whelan.
Welcome to the RTE News on 2. The headlines tonight: an innocent bystander is one of the 2 latest victims of gangland violence. Ipswich police investigating murder of 3 prostitutes find 2 more bodies. Thousands pay their respects at the funeral of murdered postmaster Alan Cuniff. And new legislation is promised on foot of primetime property investigation. Hello there, Joe will be here with all the sports news a little later on, and also on the programme tonight, a Spanish woman becomes the world's first recipient of a double arm transplant. But first tonight, a young tradesman has become the latest innocent victim of Dublin's gangland violence. He was working in a house in North Dublin this morning when one of Ireland's biggest sellers of cocaine and heroin was shot dead. Martin Marlowe Hyland was killed as he slept in a relative's house in Scribblestown Park in Finglas. Gardaí say he had been warned his life was in danger.
The bodies of the 2 latest victims of the country's gangland and gun culture were this afternoon removed from the house at Scribblestown Park in Finglas, where they were brutally murdered this morning. 39-year-old Martin Marlowe Hyland was the gunman's target. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, drug dealer in the country, he was trafficking heroin and cocaine, smuggling guns, and involved in shootings, murders and organised crime for the past 10 years, when he took over from the murdered drug dealer PJ Judge, nicknamed the Psycho.
In the last number of days we became aware of a threat to his life, or at least that there was threats hanging over him. He was visited as recently as the 7th of December this year and given some advice.
But 20-year-old Anthony Campbell was also shot dead by those who came to kill Hyland. The apprentice plumber's boss left him at the house at around 9 o'clock this morning and went for supplies. When he came back at 10, Anthony had also been shot dead. A young man doing an honest day's work, learning a trade, tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The savagery with which this was carried out, and the degree of preparation that was put into it, and the degree of surveillance that must have been there, all together combined to put it on a very, very serious level indeed.
Marlowe Hyland's criminal enterprise was the focus of the Garda Operation Oak. 30 of his associates and gang members had been arrested. 20 of his drugs shipments, worth over €15 million, had been seized, along with many of his guns. Because of his involvement in organised crime, Marlowe Hyland had many mortal enemies who wanted him dead. But what's particularly shocking about today's double murder is the fact that his killers were prepared to shoot an innocent bystander, not only to make sure they killed Marlowe Hyland, but also to ensure that they themselves couldn't be identified. Paul Reynolds, RTE News, Garda Headquarters, Dublin.
These latest shootings bring to 60 the number of violent deaths in the country this year. Over 20 of those killings were gun-related.
There's a feeling of grief and of disbelief at St Michan's Flats complex in Dublin's north inner city tonight. This is a close-knit community close to the forecourts. Local people who knew Anthony Campbell did not wish to speak on camera at this time, but they described to me a young man who was working hard to make a career and who cared for his parents and the rest of his family. Anthony Campbell was the eldest of 4 children. He had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. He was training to become a plumber. He left his home here in Dublin's north inner city this morning to go and do a job in Finglas. Tonight his family and the wider community is grieving his loss. Anthony's boss, who discovered him shot dead at around 10 o'clock this morning, is said to be deeply traumatised. During the course of the day, he has been interviewed by Gardaí and he has been physically sick. The deaths of Anthony Campbell and Martin Hyland are the 59th and 60th violent deaths in this state since the start of this year. 23 people have now been killed as a result of gun violence since the 1st of January. Gardaí say Mr Campbell was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among other victims of gun crime are Donna Cleary, who died after shots were fired into a house where she was attending a party in Coolock, and Baiba Salita, who was shot dead by a gunman who singled her out as she was smoking a cigarette with friends in Swords in County Dublin. Behind each of the 60 violent deaths so far this year, there is a grieving family, among them Anthony Campbell's, tonight being comforted by friends. Barry Cummins, RTE News, Dublin.
Police in Suffolk in England have called in help from other forces to deal with their biggest inquiry ever, the hunt for the so-called Ipswich Ripper. 5 women, all of whom had worked as prostitutes, have been found dead. The bodies of 2 women who'd been missing since Sunday were found this evening.
Now there are 5 dead women. This afternoon, a passer-by discovered the naked body of a woman in this area about 20 feet from the road. And shortly afterwards, a police helicopter crew spotted the body of a second woman a few hundred yards away.
Because of the discovery of the 2 further bodies, close to where the body of Annalee Alderton was found, we can only fear the worst. The natural assumption is that these are the 2 missing women, Annette Nichols, aged 29 years, and Paula Clennell, aged 24. That's an assumption. You'll understand that, and that's yet to be confirmed.
Annette Nichols was last seen on Tuesday, and Paula Clennell was last seen in the early hours of Sunday morning. This is the woodland close to Ipswich town where the body of another prostitute, Annalee Alderton, was found. Police said today she had been strangled. And it's believed that the bodies of 2 further sex workers were dumped from this bridge in the past fortnight. They were 25-year-old Gemma Adams and 19-year-old Tanya Nichol. Earlier today, the officer leading this investigation made this appeal to the killer.
We're working with a variety of experts, including behavioural analysts. Clearly, this is a fast-moving inquiry. I'm taking cognizance of expert advice. I mean, my appeal is simple. Give yourself up.
Here at home, the funeral has taken place in Kilkenny of the murdered postmaster Alan Cuniff. Mr Cuniff was shot dead following a robbery at his post office in Johns Green, Kilkenny last Friday. A 24-year-old man is in custody charged with his murder.
We all love you, Alan, and home will never be the same without you.
An emotional Anne Cuniff talking about her brother Alan, whose funeral mass was held in Kilkenny this afternoon. A packed St Canice's church heard parish priest Father Jim Murphy call for an end to violence in society.
We urge all in responsibility in our state, all in the leadership in our country, to rid our society of the evil of violence, of the men of the gun, and the disregard for the sacredness of human life.
32-year-old Alan Cuniff was shot as he chased an armed raider following a robbery at his post office in Johns Green in Kilkenny on Friday last. Today, post offices nationwide closed during his funeral, and An Post staff countrywide observed 2-minute silence. A book of condolence has been opened at the main post office in Kilkenny and at the GPO in Dublin. Helen McInerney, RTE News, Kilkenny.
The jury in the case of County Mayo farmer Pádraig Nally, who's charged with the manslaughter of father of 11, John Ward, has been sent to a hotel for the night. Mr Nally, who's 62 and from Finchina Cross in County Mayo, has pleaded not guilty to the unlawful killing of Mr Ward from Carabone halting site outside Galway City just over 2 years ago. The Taoiseach has told the Dáil that legislation to deal with questionable practices in the property sector is due before the Oireachtas shortly. Mr Ahern was commenting after last night's Primetime Investigates report into the industry. The Data Protection Commissioner has already sent in a team of inspectors to investigate 2 companies highlighted in the programme.
Last night, Primetime Investigates revealed a litany of questionable practices in the property industry. Among the complaints, estate agents referring buyers to mortgage brokers and getting confidential financial information in return. The Financial Regulator and the Data Protection Commission are already investigating the revelations.
I also sent in inspection teams to the 2 companies which were highlighted in last night's programme, that obviously we'll be following through with those 2. And thirdly, we will be carrying out random inspections of mortgage brokerages over the next couple of weeks.
Mark Kelly, Managing Director of Michael Kelly Associates of Carysfort Avenue in Blackrock, which was inspected by the Data Protection Commission this morning, disputed some primetime claims, but admitted others, including faking bids.
I absolutely hold my hand up and say, in certain circumstances, to serve the best interests of our client, we will put an offer on the table, or suggest that there's an offer on the table in and around the guide price, just so that people can see that there's other interest there. Now,
even though there isn't.
It's wrong and it's dishonest.
The programme also highlighted problems surrounding property management companies for communal properties like apartment blocks, which failed to produce accounts or provide services. The Director of Corporate Enforcement, Paul Appleby, launched a consultation paper to address the problems surrounding such companies. He warned that thousands of apartment owners are at risk of seeing millions wiped off the value of their homes.
Basically, an apartment owner may not be able to sell his or her property or his or her apartment in the worst case scenario.
The Director of Corporate Enforcement has invited submissions from interested parties by the 30th of March. Last night's revelations on Primetime Investigates seem likely to trigger a flood of responses, particularly from anxious property owners. Ingrid Miley, RTE News, at the office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement.
Many migrant workers face a lonely Christmas in Ireland this year, according to the Migrant Rights Centre. They say that workers who've become undocumented through no fault of their own are too afraid to leave the country. The Migrant Rights Centre is calling on the government to introduce a bridging visa that would allow undocumented workers to re-enter legal employment and safely return home for visits.
Irina came to Ireland legally from Ukraine in 2002 with a permit to work for a mushroom grower. Irina worked up to 16 hours a day in appalling conditions. She was tied to her employer and had no choice.
We are just like slaves, because everything depends on your employer, you know. You cannot leave job, you cannot say about what you don't like, because your employer will not do your work permit again and you became undocumented. Or you have to go home, you know.
After injuring her hand, it became impossible for Irina to continue picking mushrooms, and she became unemployed and undocumented. Even though other employers wanted to hire Irina, once undocumented, she was precluded from re-entering legal employment and now works without a permit. The Migrant Rights Centre say that many migrant workers get caught in this legal limbo and that a temporary visa system is needed to allow them to find new employers or complain about existing exploitation.
Where people become undocumented through no fault of their own, they're more likely employers who are willing to exploit will get away with it. It's equivalent of being, you know, a victim of a crime and being the one thrown in jail. It's the injustice is very clearly there in terms of the person, the migrant worker, being treated like a criminal even though they've done nothing wrong.
Irina cannot return home for fear of not being allowed back into Ireland. She finds Christmas a particularly difficult time.
My parents became very old and sick and nobody cannot help them, you know, so it's more difficult time because, you know, Christmas here in Ireland, it's very family, and everybody meet it with family, and we are here without family.
Anna Murphy, RTE News.
And tomorrow night we'll be looking at the issue of refugees seeking family reunification. Next we'll take a look at some of today's other news stories now. Here's Niamh Nolan.
Deputy Sean Haughey, who threatened to quit politics 10 months ago, has been appointed Minister of State at the Department of Education and Science. The announcement was made by the Taoiseach in the Dáil. Deputy Haughey replaces Sheila De Valera, who resigned last week. Galway Circuit Court has been told that a trailer attached to a circus lorry involved in a fatal collision on the outskirts of Galway City last April had no braking system or safety chain. Circus owner Stephen Courtney and animal trainer and driver Francesco Daria have pleaded guilty to charges arising from the accident in which Joan Riley and her daughter Siobhan were killed. The death toll from the suicide bombing in central Baghdad has risen to 70. More than 230 people were injured when the bomber set off explosives in a pickup truck after reportedly attracting crowds of Shia labourers to his vehicle with the promise of work. Earlier, a White House official said President Bush will delay unveiling a new strategy on Iraq until next month. The Revenue Commissioners have published the names of 141 tax defaulters who made tax settlements between July and September. It includes a €5 million settlement paid by a businessman and his company in Arklow. The total collected by the Revenue during the 3 months was €32 million.
A Spanish woman has become the world's first recipient of a double arm transplant. The 47-year-old woman lost her arms after an explosion in a laboratory where she was studying chemistry almost 30 years ago.
They're beautiful is how 47-year-old Alba described her new arms and hands today. The Spanish woman is recovering in hospital in Valencia after the pioneering operation. It was made possible after a woman